You check your position size before you take the trade. It's small, well within your rules. Statistically, it's one of the safest trades you'll place all week. And yet your hand hesitates over the button. Your stomach tightens. And some part of you treats this ordinary, boring, well-sized trade like it's genuinely dangerous. Why would your body react that strongly to something your own rules already approved? Meanwhile, a different trade barely registers as a decision at all. You size up without thinking twice, you skip your usual checklist, you barely notice you've taken on more risk than you normally would. No hesitation, no tightened stomach, nothing. It feels, if anything, more comfortable than the first one. How can the riskier trade feel like the safer one? Here's the part that should bother you. The trade that felt dangerous was the safe one, and the trade that felt like nothing was the one that actually put your account at risk. If your brain is supposed to be estimating danger accurately, why does it keep getting the two exactly backwards? Why does the well-sized, rule-following trade come with a warning siren, while the oversized one slips through without a sound? It's tempting to say you just need to trust the math more. Calculate the real risk, trust the number, move on with confidence. But that advice assumes the problem is a lack of information. And is that really the issue here? You already knew the position size on both trades. You already had the probabilities available to you before you clicked anything. The gap isn't in what you know. So, if it's not a missing fact, what exactly is going wrong between knowing the number and feeling the danger? It's in how your brain converts what you know into a feeling of danger, and that conversion process runs on rules that have almost nothing to do with statistics. Welcome back to Trading Psychology Animated. Today, we're going to unpack exactly why your brain is so bad at reading actual risk, and more importantly, what it's using instead. Start with the psychologist most responsible for mapping this territory in the first place. Paul Slovic spent decades studying how people actually perceive risk, as opposed to how risk actually behaves in the world. And his research points to something now called the affect heuristic. You don't calculate risk and then feel afraid as a result. You feel afraid first, and that feeling becomes your risk estimate on the spot. The emotion isn't a reaction to the number. For most people, most of the time, isn't the emotion simply standing in for the number. Slovic's work identified specific qualities that make something feel far more dangerous than it statistically is, almost regardless of the actual probability involved. Dread is one of them. Anything that feels catastrophic, sudden, or completely outside your control gets rated as riskier by the brain, even when the real odds are small. The second factor Slovic identified is what he called unknown risk, meaning anything unfamiliar, anything whose effects aren't immediately visible, anything novel enough that you haven't built a mental file for it yet. New unfamiliar setups get flagged as dangerous by default. Why? Because the brain has no track record to compare them against, whether or not the underlying odds actually justify that alarm. That's why a strategy you've never traded before can feel riskier on day one than a strategy that's actually been quietly losing you money for months, simply because the losing one has become familiar. Familiarity works in the exact opposite direction, and this is the part that should genuinely concern you. Anything routine, anything you've done 100 times before starts to feel safe simply because it's familiar, whether or not the underlying risk has changed at all between attempt 1 and attempt 100. Does the 100th repetition of a bad habit really carry less risk than the first, or does it just carry less alarm? Does that sound like anything from your own trading? A big, dramatic, unfamiliar setup can trigger real dread, even when your stop loss is tight and your position size is genuinely small, purely because it's new and its outcome feels uncertain. And a routine, everyday trade can feel completely safe purely because you've placed one just like it 50 times before, even when this particular one happens to be quietly oversized. What changed between the trade that scared you and the one that didn't, if not the actual numbers? If you're finding this useful so far, this is a good point to hit like and subscribe, because the next piece of research explains something even stranger about how sure you feel when you're wrong. There's a second researcher whose work makes this even harder to shake off once you've seen it. Baruch Fischhoff spent years studying how confident people feel in their own risk judgments compared with how accurate those judgments actually turn out to be. What he found was unsettling. People aren't just wrong about risks sometimes. People are frequently most confident exactly when they're most wrong. How is that even possible if confidence is supposed to track accuracy? In Fishoff's calibration studies, when people said they were 99% certain about a judgment, they were wrong far more often than 1 time in 100, sometimes wrong as often as 1 time in 5. Feeling sure isn't evidence of being right. Isn't it just a feeling, running on its own separate track from actual accuracy? Think about what that means for the trade that felt like nothing. It didn't just fail to trigger fear, it came wrapped in a quiet, confident sense that everything was fine, which is precisely the feeling Fishoff's research found to be least reliable as a signal of accuracy. Meanwhile, the trade that felt dangerous came wrapped in doubt, in a mind actively second-guessing itself. Isn't that doubt, uncomfortable as it feels, actually the more honest of the two states? Here's the twist. You'd expect the dramatic, dreaded risks, the ones Slovik's research says trigger the strongest fear response, to be the ones that actually hurt traders most. They aren't, at least not consistently. Why not? Because the setups that generate real fear tend to come with real caution built in automatically. Tighter stops, smaller size, closer attention, a hand that hesitates right before it acts. The fear does its job, even when it's statistically exaggerated. So if the scary trades are already getting handled carefully, where does the real damage actually come from? It's the quiet trades, the ones that never trip the alarm at all, that quietly do the lasting damage, precisely because nothing about them ever asked you to be careful in the first place. This is the same pattern behind why a trader can survive an entire string of obviously reckless, high-drama trades relatively unscathed, and then get seriously hurt by something that looked almost boring on the screen. The dramatic trade got respected, watched, managed, sized down out of sheer discomfort. The boring one got waved straight through precisely because it never looked like a threat worth managing. Your risk management instincts, it turns out, aren't actually guarding against the things that feel risky. They're guarding against the things that feel risky. How often have those two lists actually matched if you're honest with yourself? Most traders can name their scariest loss from memory in an instant. Far fewer can name the slow, quiet leak that did more damage over a longer stretch of time, precisely because it never felt like an event worth remembering. And this isn't a flaw unique to trading, which is worth sitting with for a second, because it reframes the whole problem. It's the exact same mechanism behind why people report feeling more afraid of flying than driving, even though driving is statistically far more dangerous per mile traveled. A plane crash is dreaded, sudden, unfamiliar, and completely outside personal control, so it registers as deeply frightening even though it's genuinely rare. A car crash is familiar, gradual by comparison, and feels controllable because you're the one holding the wheel, so it barely registers as a threat at all, even though it's the far more common way people actually get hurt. Would you say driving is safer than flying, or does it just feel that way? It's the same reason a shark attack dominates headlines and imagination for weeks, while something as mundane as a slip in a bathroom barely earns a second thought, despite being wildly more likely to hurt any given person. Dread and drama hijack the risk estimating machinery every time. Familiarity and routine quietly disable it, one repetition at a time. Neither reaction, if you actually check the numbers, has much to do with the real odds involved. Isn't it strange how rarely the fear and the danger actually line up? Notice what this means for your own process going forward. The goal was never to simply feel less afraid on the dramatic trades, which is the advice most people default to when this topic comes up. Slovik's research suggests fear, even exaggerated fear, is still doing useful work by forcing extra caution onto a trade that's already getting watched closely. The real blind spot sits in the opposite direction, the trades that generate zero emotional signal at all, the ones so routine and familiar that your brain has quietly stopped treating them as decisions worth any caution, are exactly the ones Fishoff's calibration research says deserve the least trust in that comfortable, confident feeling attached to them. So the next time you're sizing a trade and it feels completely fine, completely routine, nothing to think twice about, the useful question isn't, how scared am I right now? It's, does this feel routine specifically because it's actually safe, or does it just feel routine because I've done this enough times that my brain quietly stopped paying attention? Those two states feel identical from the inside, in the moment, with no warning that they're different. Only one of them is actually safe. How would you even tell the difference in the moment without stopping to check? Your brain was never built to calculate risk with statistical accuracy in the first place. It was built to flag drama and quietly wave through the familiar. And it has been doing exactly that, silently, underneath every single trade you've placed today, whether you noticed it happening or not. The safe-looking trade that made your stomach tighten was never the dangerous one. The real question, the one worth carrying into your next session, was always which trade never asked you to feel anything at all. If this changed how you look at your own risk sizing, tell us in the comments which trade recently felt routine right before it didn't. Hit like and subscribe for more of this. Thanks for watching.